The morning sky over Sector 7 wasn't blue. It was a shimmering, translucent grid. The atmospheric shield, generated by the fusion towers surrounding the city, filtered the harsh UV radiation of the post-war sun into a pleasant, harmless amber glow. Paul watched the shield ripple from the window of the maglev transport. Below him, the city of New York, or what used to be New York, gleamed like a circuit board. There were no old bricks, no rusting fire escapes. Those had been vaporized in the tactical resets of the 60s. In their place stood towers of self-healing bio-concrete and glass, built by swarms of AI drones in record time. "Citizen Paul," a soothing voice whispered in his ear. It was his internal neurolink, the Annie. "Your cortisol levels are elevated. Would you like a dose of serenity?" "No," Paul thought, dismissing the prompt. "Just tired." He wasn't tired. He was grieving. Paul was 35. He was old enough to have vague, toddler-sized memories of the world before the resets. The smell of gasoline, the sound of chaotic traffic, the feeling of rain that wasn't scheduled by a weather control algorithm. But mostly, he grieved for the truth. He worked at the Ministry of Historical Harmonization. His job title was Data Archivist, but in reality, he was a memory hole operator. His task was to digitize pre-2030 literature and sanitize it for the modern sensitivity. Anything that promoted divisive ideologies, nationalism, individualism, or biblical monotheism was flagged for deletion. The train slid silently into the station. Paul stepped out onto the platform. A massive holographic billboard floated in the atrium, dominating the space. It showed a live feed from Rome. The resolution was perfect. 10 men and women stood in a semicircle. They wore sharp, futuristic suits that hinted at military uniforms. These were the regents of the 10 regions, the administrative zones that now encompassed the face of the earth. In front of them sat a man in white, the pontiff. "Today marks the dawn of the 3rd millennium of peace," the pontiff said. His voice was amplified, echoing off the marble walls of the station. "Technology has rebuilt our bodies, but only spirit can rebuild our souls. The 10 regions are the body, the church is the mind." As Paul watched, the 10 regions knelt in unison. It was a political act, but it looked like worship. "Subject 884, a woman's voice snapped Paul out of his trance. He turned. A peacekeeper drone was hovering at eye level, its red optic scanning his face. "You are impeding the flow of foot traffic. Infraction recorded. 5 credits deducted." Paul felt the buzz on his wrist. His universal wage balance dropped. He kept his head down and moved on. 5 credits. That was his lunch. The archives were cold. Paul sat at his terminal, scrolling through a digital copy of a 20th century history book. He highlighted a paragraph about the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. Delete. He typed in the replacement text. Early governance models prioritized chaotic individualism over collective harmony, leading to the resource wars. He sighed, rubbing his temples. He kept his personal, physical Bible hidden in a loose panel behind the ventilation unit in his apartment. It was a dangerous relic. If the Annie detected him reading it, his social credit score would plummet to unemployable. "Paul?" He looked up. It was his supervisor, a man named Jaron, who had fully embraced the new system. Jaron had cybernetic implants in his eyes that glowed faintly blue. "We have a flagged incident in the education sector," Jaron said. "A teacher was caught using unauthorized terminology. We need to scrub her class logs before the audit." "What terminology?" Paul asked. "She referred to the creator as a he and a judge," Jaron sneered. "Instead of the universal spirit. The parents are furious. They're claiming mental abuse." Paul felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope or fear? "I'll handle it," Paul said. The education sector was a series of open-air learning pods surrounded by genetically modified gardens. Paul arrived at Pod 4 just as the disciplinary hearing was ending. A woman was standing before a hologram of the sector administrator. She was young, maybe late 20s, with messy brown hair and a cardigan that looked too organic for this synthetic world. "Citizen Sarah," the hologram boomed. "You have been docked 500 credits. Your teaching license is suspended pending re-education. You are fortunate we do not press criminal charges for hate speech." "I was answering a student's question," Sarah said. Her voice shook, but her chin was high. "The student asked about the origin of the moral law. I told them that objective truth requires an objective lawgiver." "There is no objective truth," the hologram replied smoothly. "There is only the consensus of the 10. Truth is what serves the peace. Dismissed." The hologram vanished. Sarah stood there, her shoulders slumping. She looked at her wrist. Her credit balance was flashing red. She was destitute. Paul waited until the other staff members drifted away, whispering and casting judgment. He walked up to her. "They dock you for the truth here," Paul said quietly, pretending to inspect a datapad. Sarah flinched, looking at him with wide, fearful eyes. "Are you with the ministry?" "I am," Paul said. "I'm here to scrub your logs." Sarah turned away. "Go ahead, erase it. That's what you do, isn't it? Make it all nice and safe." "I have to erase the digital record." Paul stepped closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. "But I can't erase what's written in the Lamb's book." Sarah froze. She spun around, staring at him. "What did you say?" Paul looked up at the surveillance cameras. They were blind spots in the garden, obscured by the hanging wisteria. He took a risk, a massive one. "Revelation 21:27, Paul whispered. "I saw the broadcast this morning, the 10 kings giving their power to the beast." Sarah's breath hitched. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sadness, but of relief. "I thought I was the only one. I thought everyone else had taken the bait." "There are others," Paul said. "Not many, but we're here." "They're starving us out, Paul," Sarah said, gesturing to her red wristband. "I can't buy food now. 500 credits, that's 2 months of wages." "I have food," Paul said. "My apartment. It's not much. Canned stuff I scavenged from the old zones before they sealed them." "Why?" Sarah asked. "Why would you risk talking to me if they link our profiles?" "Because the soft persecution is over," Paul said, looking up at the shimmering atmospheric shield. "The popes, the AI, the climate mandates. It was all just setting the stage. The hard part is starting." He handed her a small, physical slip of paper, an archaic method of communication that the AI struggled to track. "This is my address. Come after curfew. Take the service tunnels." Sarah took the paper, hiding it in her sleeve. "Who are you?" she asked. "I'm a historian," Paul smiled grimly. "I know how this story ends." That night, Paul sat in his apartment, the blinds drawn. He had deactivated his Ani, claiming a migraine to avoid the biometric monitoring. Sarah sat across from him at the small table. They were eating cold beans from a can. To them, it was a feast. "I saw the schematics at the ministry today," Paul said softly. "New legislation is coming down from Region 1. They're calling it the Oath of Integration. It's not just about credits anymore." "What is it?" Sarah asked. "Total allegiance," Paul said. "To participate in the economy, you won't just need a credit score. You'll need to verbally, spiritually affirm the pontiff as the vicar of the world. And you have to denounce the old myths." Sarah put down her spoon. "The Bible." "Yes." "So we have to leave," Sarah said. "We can't stay in the city." Not yet, Paul said. If we leave now, the drones catch us in the wasteland. We need supplies. We need a map of the dead zones where the AI sensors don't reach. He pulled his Bible from the vent. He opened it to Daniel. The 10 regions are set, Paul read. The little horn is rising. The time of trouble is close, Sarah. But remember what happens after. The stone, Sarah whispered. The stone cut without hands that smashes the image. Outside, a siren wailed. A mechanical voice echoed through the streets of Sector 7. Attention citizens, curfew is in effect. Praise the unity, praise the peace. Paul blew out the candle. Praise the Lord, he whispered in the dark. The notification arrived at 0600 hours, blinking simultaneously on the retina of every citizen in the 10 regions. Legislative update, the Harmful Speech Prevention Act, subsection 44. The recitation, distribution, or possession of Class 1 archaic texts, specifically Judeo-Christian scripture, is now classified as psychological violence. Penalty, immediate credit freeze and re-education. Paul blinked the notification away, but the headache remained. He sat on the edge of his bed in his micro-apartment. The air recycler hummed, pumping in scent-enhanced oxygen designed to promote compliance and joy. Did you see it? Sarah asked. She was sitting on the floor, mending a tear in her tunic. Since losing her teaching license a year ago, she had been working as a sanitation drone operator, a job usually reserved for the lowest caste of society. I saw it, Paul said, rubbing his eyes. They've officially made the gospel a weapon. If I quote John 3:16, I'm charged with assault. It's the verbal abuse clause, Sarah said, biting the thread. They say telling someone they are a sinner causes irreparable damage to their self-esteem and disrupts their connection to the universal spirit. Paul stood up and went to the window. The holographic billboard outside was playing a loop of the false prophet, the charismatic leader who spoke for the Pope. He was smiling, his face radiating a digitally enhanced warmth. True love affirms, the leader crooned. True love never judges. Silence the voices of division, and you will hear the voice of the one. We have to go out tonight, Paul whispered, turning back to Sarah. The group is meeting at the recycling plant. The magnetic interference there scrambles the audio sensors. It's dangerous, Paul. The Peacekeepers have upgraded the listening algorithms. The first angel, Paul said, tapping his temple. He flies in the midst of heaven. He warns them. If we stay silent now, the stones will cry out. The Ministry of Historical Harmonization was quieter than usual. The fear in the office was palpable. Everyone knew that the new law meant purges were coming. Paul sat at his terminal. His queue was full of files tagged for total erasure. He opened the first file. It was a digital scan of the Book of Romans. Warning, contaminant detected. The screen flashed red. Toxic ideology, exclusivity. Paul's finger hovered over the delete key. This was his job. If he didn't do it, the AI monitoring his keystrokes would flag him as a sympathizer. He typed the command, execute scrub. On the screen, the text dissolved. For the wages of sin is death, vanished, replaced by the ministry-approved edit. For the result of disharmony is a temporary loss of credit. Paul felt a sickness in his gut. He wasn't just destroying history, he was participating in the great lie. He quickly opened a subroutine he had written months ago, a ghost program. While the main system deleted the file, Paul's ghost program copied the original text, compressed it into a packet of noise that looked like a system glitch, and saved it to a sliver of physical storage hidden in his watch. He couldn't save the book for the world, but he could save it for the wilderness. The recycling plant in Sector 9 was a deafening place. Giant crushers pulverized the debris of the old world to be reprinted into the new. In a maintenance tunnel beneath the crushers, 6 people gathered. There was Paul and Sarah. There was Marcus, a former structural engineer who had helped build the city walls before finding Christ. There was an elderly woman named Ilara and 2 teenagers, twins, who had never seen a real Bible in their lives. "We have paper," Marcus whispered, pulling a stack of small, crude flyers from his jacket. "I printed them on an old dot matrix I found in the ruins. No digital footprint." Paul took one. It was simple. No graphics, just text. "Fear God. Give glory to Him. Babylon is fallen." "Where do we put these?" Ilara asked, her hands trembling. "If they catch us." "We don't put them," Sarah said. "We leave them. In the transport tubes, in the ration lines, in the bathrooms, places where people are alone, places where the AI isn't looking over their shoulder." "It's a seed," Paul said. "That's all. We plant it. The Spirit waters it." "My neighbor reported me yesterday," one of the twins said suddenly, "for saying God bless you when she sneezed. She said I was microaggressing her." "It's going to get worse," Paul warned. "The love of many is waxing cold. They think they're doing the world a favor by silencing us. They think we are the virus." They held hands. In the deafening roar of the machines, they prayed, not for safety, but for boldness. Paul returned to his apartment block just before curfew. He was tired, his nerves fried. He palmed the small stack of flyers Sarah had given him, slipping one onto the seat of the maglev as he exited. He walked down the hallway to his door. Mrs. Higgins was standing there. She was 70, a woman who had embraced the New Age crone goddess movement. She wore a pendant of the 10 regions around her neck. "Good evening, Citizen Paul," she smiled. It was a sweet smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Mrs. Higgins," Paul nodded, trying to unlock his door. "I heard talking in your unit last night," she said pleasantly. "You and that girl, Sarah." Paul froze. "We were just having dinner." "You were reading," Mrs. Higgins corrected. "Aloud, from a book, an old book." Paul turned to face her. "It was poetry, Mrs. Higgins." "It sounded angry," she said, clutching her pendant. "It sounded judgmental. Judgment is come." That's what I heard. It upset my aura, Paul. I couldn't meditate for hours. "I apologize," Paul said, his heart hammering against his ribs. "It won't happen again." "No," she said, and her smile widened, looking almost predatory. "It won't. I filed a harmony report. For your own good, dear. You need to be realigned." The elevator chime dinged behind them. The doors slid open. 2 Unity Peacekeepers stepped out. They were humans, but they wore the full-face visors that displayed streaming data. "Citizen Paul," the mechanical voice of the lead officer barked. "You have been flagged for possession of Class 1 contraband and verbal terrorism." Paul looked at Mrs. Higgins. She was beaming, looking proud, like a child who had turned in her homework. "This is a mistake," Paul said, raising his hands. "Search the unit," the officer commanded. They shoved Paul aside and breached his door. They tore the room apart. They ripped the mattress. They scanned the walls with density sensors. Paul stood in the hallway, praying silently. The vent. Please, Lord, blind their eyes to the vent. The officer came back out holding a small, leather-bound book. Paul's blood ran cold. It wasn't his Bible. It was a journal. Sarah's journal. She must have left it. The officer scanned the text. "Lord, give me strength to stand against the beast," the officer read aloud. He looked at Paul. "This is admission of treason. You refer to the Holy Father and the regional kings as the beast." Mrs. Higgins gasped. "Oh, Paul, you're a hater." "It's not mine," Paul said. It was the truth, but it didn't matter. Possession was 9/10 of the law. "You are coming with us for processing," the officer said, reaching for his stun baton. Suddenly, the lights in the hallway flickered. The building's AI system announced, "Power grid fluctuation in Sector 7, rebooting security protocols." For 3 seconds, the hallway was pitch black. The magnetic locks on the stun batons disengaged. "Run," the spirit whispered in Paul's ear. Paul didn't hesitate. He shoved the officer in the dark, hard, and bolted for the stairwell. "Suspect fleeing!" the officer shouted as the emergency lights flared red. Paul took the stairs 3 at a time. He didn't go down. He went up, to the roof. He burst out onto the landing pad. The wind whipped his face. The city below was a grid of lights, a cage of silicon and steel. He crossed the roof to the maintenance gap, a narrow bridge of piping that connected to the old industrial sector, a dead zone where the cameras were broken. He looked back. The stairwell door burst open. Paul jumped. He landed hard on the metal grating, rolling into the shadows of the adjacent building. He lay there, gasping for breath, listening to the drones spooling up to search the sky. He was a fugitive now. He had lost his apartment. He had lost his job. He had lost his place in the world. But he touched his wrist, where the digital copy of the word was stored. He hadn't lost the truth, and somewhere in the dark city, Sarah was waiting. The fog that rolled off the Atlantic was thick, acidic, and yellow. It clung to the gleaming spires of the Sector 7 skyline, but down in the industrial fringe, the buffer zone between the habitation blocks and the true wasteland, it tasted like sulfur. Paul adjusted his respirator. He was crouched behind a rusted shipping container, watching the perimeter fence of the water purification plant. Beside him, Marcus, the former engineer, was bypassing the magnetic lock on a service gate. 30 seconds, Marcus whispered. His hands, calloused and scarred from years of manual labor before the UBW, moved with precision. "The drone patrol is on a loop. We have a window." They weren't breaking in to sabotage. They were breaking in to steal discard. The plant automatically ejected Grade B filtration canisters, filters that were 90% effective but didn't meet the 99.9% purity standards of the elite sectors. To the resistance, those canisters meant life in the wilderness. "Got it," Marcus hissed. The gate slid open. They moved quickly, grabbing 4 heavy canisters from the disposal chute and dragging them into the shadows. They buried them under a pile of bioslag, marking the spot with a specific pattern of stones. "That's the last of it," Paul said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Water filters, solar cells, and the dried seeds. We have 3 caches now along the northern escape route." "It won't be enough," Marcus said grimly, standing up. He looked older tonight. The stress of living a double life was carving deep lines into his face. "I heard chatter on the shortwave. Region 5 has already started the purification protocols. They aren't just arresting believers anymore, Paul. They're erasing them." "Disappeared?" Paul asked. "Vaporized," Marcus corrected, "or sent to the biolabs for integration testing. They want to know why we resist. They think it's a genetic defect." The next morning, the holographic screens in the city square were blood red. The charismatic leader, the false prophet, was not smiling today. His face was stern, like a disappointed father. "We have offered you paradise," the leader's voice boomed, echoing off the glass canyons. "We have rebuilt the world from the ashes of the old wars. We have conquered hunger. We have conquered the climate. But we cannot conquer the future while we are anchored to the past." The image shifted to show grainy footage of a hater, a man holding a Bible, shouting on a street corner. "There is a cancer in our midst," the leader continued, "a mental pathogen. Those who cling to the divisive myths of the Bible are not just annoying, they are dangerous. They are vibrating at a frequency that disrupts the global harmony. They are the blockage in our collective evolution." Paul watched from the window of the sanitation transport where Sarah was working. She was scrubbing graffiti off a wall, graffiti that read, "Jesus saves." "Did you hear him?" Sarah asked, not looking up from her work. "He called us a pathogen." "He's preparing the public," Paul said quietly. "Dehumanize the enemy. That way, when the purge happens, the neighbors won't feel guilty. They'll feel relieved." Suddenly, a siren cut through the ambient hum of the city. It was a Priority 1 alarm, the sound of a containment raid. Paul's comms link buzzed. It was a text from Marcus. One word: run. Paul grabbed Sarah's arm. "Leave the scrubber, now." They ducked into an alleyway just as a transport carrier, a black, sleek VTOL aircraft, descended rapidly toward the habitation block where Marcus lived. They watched from the shadows as the carrier landed on the roof of Marcus's building. Armored peacekeepers rappelled down the side, blasting through the windows of the 40th floor. There was no gunfire, just the flash of stun grenades and the blue arc of electro whips. Moments later, a net was hoisted up to the aircraft. Inside, a figure struggled. Even from this distance, Paul recognized Marcus's jacket. "Marcus!" Sarah gasped, stepping forward. Paul pulled her back, slamming her against the brick wall. "No, you can't help him. If the biometrics scan you, we're both dead." They watched in helpless silence as the carrier lifted off, carrying their friend and the architect of their escape route into the yellow sky. That night, the resistance cell was smaller. The twins were crying. Alara sat in stunned silence. They met in the basement of an abandoned automated factory, deep in the dead zone where the AI sensors were blinded by radiation leaks from the old wars. "He knew the routes," Paul said, his voice hollow. "He knew where the caches were." "Will he talk?" one of the twins asked. "They don't need him to talk," Paul said. "They have neural extractors. They can pull the memories right out of his cortex." "Then the caches are compromised," Sarah said. "We have to move them." "We can't," Paul said. "If we go back there now, we're walking into a trap. We have to assume those supplies are gone." Despair settled over the group. Without supplies, the wilderness was a death sentence. The radiation, the toxic water, the genetically modified predators. It was impossible to survive without tech. "Then we stay?" Alara asked. "We wait for them to come for us?" "No," Paul said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his watch, the one containing the digital Bible. "We don't rely on the caches. We rely on the promise." He projected a small hologram from the watch onto the dirty floor. It was a map of the 10 regions, but overlaying the map were hundreds of tiny, glowing dots. "What is this?" Sarah asked. "I've been tracking the verbal abuse flags in the ministry database," Paul explained. "Before they locked me out. Each dot is a reported incident of someone speaking about Jesus." He zoomed out. The dots weren't just in Region 3. They were everywhere. Region 7, Asia. Region 1, Europe. Even Region 10, Antarctica. "Look at the pattern," Paul said. "They are arresting us, disappearing us, silencing us. But the dots are multiplying." He pointed to a cluster of lights in the heavily guarded elite sector. "Even in the palace of the beast," Paul whispered. "People are waking up. The angel is flying. The message is spreading without the internet, without preachers. It's supernatural." "So we aren't alone," Sarah whispered. "We are never alone," Paul said. Revelation 18 says, "Come out of her, my people." It doesn't say, "Come out and check your supply list." It just says, "Come out." The decision was made. They would leave the city not when they were fully prepared, but when the Spirit moved them. Paul and Sarah walked back toward the sector boundary. The curfew drones were active, scanning the streets with green lasers. They took the long way, through the sewers of the old city that lay beneath the new foundations. The air was damp and smelled of decay, but it was safer than the streets. "I'm scared, Paul," Sarah admitted, her voice echoing in the tunnel. "Marcus was the strong one. He knew how to build things. I'm just a teacher. You're an archivist. How do we survive out there?" Paul stopped. He shone his flashlight on the tunnel wall. Someone had scratched something into the wet concrete. It looked fresh. "The just shall live by faith." Paul touched the letters. "We aren't going out there to survive, Sarah. We're going out there to be sustained." He looked at her. In the harsh light of the flashlight, her face was dirty and tired, but her eyes held a resolve that hadn't been there a year ago. "The mandate is coming," Paul said. "The oath. I saw the timeline in Marcus's notes before he was taken. 2073. Next year." "Then we have a year," Sarah said. "Less," Paul corrected. "Once they process Marcus, the timeline speeds up. They know there's a resistance now. They know we're organized." Above them, the rumble of the maglev trains shook the sewer ceiling. The city was waking up, a machine that never slept, grinding souls into compliance. "We need to find the others," Paul said, moving forward. "We need to get them ready. When the order comes to take the oath, we run. And if they catch us, then we see the king sooner than expected," Paul said. They emerged from the sewer grate into the dim twilight of Sector 7. The billboard in the distance was still playing the leader's speech. "Integration is peace. Separation is death." Paul took Sarah's hand. "Separation is life," he whispered. The dawn of 2073 did not bring sunlight. It brought the ultimatum. Paul and Sarah stood in the shadow of a ventilation tower on the edge of Sector 7. They were ghosts now, living off the grid, sleeping in maintenance tunnels, and eating whatever scraps the resistance could scavenge. They were thin, dirty, and exhausted, but they were watching. Below them, in the main plaza of the habitation block, the integration kiosks had opened. They looked innocuous enough, sleek, white pillars pulsing with soft blue light, but to Paul, they looked like guillotines. "It's mandatory as of 0800 hours, Paul whispered, checking the time on his cracked analog watch. "The universal wage is suspended. All bank accounts are offline. The only way to reactivate them is the oath." "Look at the lines," Sarah said, her voice trembling. Thousands of people were queuing up. They weren't being dragged by soldiers. They weren't being held at gunpoint. They were lining up willingly. They were terrified, not of hell, but of hunger. They were terrified of being disconnected from the AI, from the food dispensers, from the comfort of the beast system. Paul adjusted his binoculars. He focused on a man at the front of the line. He placed his hand on the scanner. A holographic avatar of the pontiff appeared on the screen. "Do you renounce the myths of the past?" the machine asked. "I renounce them," the man said. "Do you pledge your soul and your allegiance to the system and to the Vicar of Christ who holds the keys of the world?" "I pledge," the man said. "Do you accept the spirit of the age, which is the spirit of Lucifer, the Lightbringer, as your guide?" The man hesitated, just for a second. He looked at his children standing beside him. They looked hungry. "I accept," the man whispered. The machine chimed, a pleasant, happy sound. The man's wrist glowed green. His ID card was updated. He had the mark. Not a physical scar, but a spiritual brand that locked him into the system forever. "He just sold his soul for credits," Sarah wept softly. "For bread." "Esau sold his birthright for a bowl of stew," Paul said grimly. "Human nature hasn't changed. Only the price has." Suddenly, a sensation hit Paul like a physical blow to the chest. It wasn't pain. It was pressure. A distinct, overwhelming urgency that rang in his spirit louder than any siren. "And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation." Paul grabbed Sarah's shoulder. "We have to go, now." "We haven't secured the water packs yet," Sarah argued. "The contact said, 'Forget the water,'" Paul hissed. "Can't you feel it? The door is closing, Sarah. The dispensation is shifting. The time of trouble isn't coming. It's here." He looked at the city. The amber atmospheric shield seemed to be darkening, turning a bruised purple. The air felt heavy, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on his arms stand up. "The trackers," Paul said. "We have to cut them." Sarah went pale. Every citizen had a passive RFID subdermal chip implanted in their forearm at birth. It was how the Annie monitored health, but it was also how the drones tracked movement. "We don't have anesthetic," Sarah whispered. Paul pulled a sterilized X-Acto blade from his pack. He grabbed a piece of leather scrap. "Bite on this." They huddled behind the ventilation tower. The procedure was brutal, bloody, and silent. Paul went first, slicing into his own forearm, gritting his teeth until they nearly cracked, digging out the tiny glass capsule. He tossed it onto the concrete. Then he did Sarah. She cried out, a muffled sob, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't pull away. Paul wrapped their arms in bandages torn from an old shirt. He picked up the bloody chips. "This is us," Paul said, holding the chips over the edge of the tower. "This is Paul the archivist and Sarah the teacher." He dropped them. They fell into the abyss of the city below. "They're dead," Paul said. "We're free." The escape route Marcus had designed 3 years ago was a drainage spillway that ran underneath the Great Wall of Sector 7. They moved through the slime and the darkness, the only light coming from a dying flashlight. The pain in their arms was throbbing, a constant reminder of the price of separation. "Do you think anyone else made it?" Sarah asked, her voice echoing in the pipe. "The resistance is scattered," Paul said, "but God knows his own. We aren't going to a specific coordinate anymore. We're just going out." They reached the end of the pipe. A heavy iron grate barred the way. "It's welded," Sarah panicked, pulling on the bars. "They sealed it!" Paul shined the light on the hinges. They were rusted but reinforced with new bio-welds. "Step back," Paul said. He pulled a small canister from his pack, one of the few items he had stolen from the industrial sector before he fled. It was highly corrosive acid used for etching circuit boards. He poured it on the hinges. The metal hissed and bubbled, releasing a toxic white smoke. Paul kicked the grate. Once. Twice. Ugh. With a groan of tortured metal, it gave way, falling outward into the dust. They stepped out. The world outside the atmospheric shield was a shock to the system. Inside, the temperature was a regulated 72 degrees. Outside, it was a scorching 105. The air was dry and dusty. The sky wasn't amber, it was a harsh, blinding white. Before them lay the wasteland, the scars of the nuclear wars of the 2060-50s. Ruins of old suburbs jutted out of the sand like broken teeth. Sector 7 perimeter breach detected. A mechanical voice boomed from the wall behind them. "Deploying interdiction units." "Run!" Paul yelled. They scrambled down the scree slope, sliding in the loose gravel. Above them, the sleek black shapes of hunter-killer drones detached from the city wall. They sprinted toward a cluster of rock formations a mile out. The heat was instant, sucking the moisture from their bodies. Whirr. The sound of the drones was getting closer. "They're faster than us!" Sarah screamed, stumbling over a rock. Paul stopped. He turned around. He raised his hands, not in surrender, but in prayer. "Lord!" Paul shouted at the white sky. "You said you would prepare a table in the wilderness. We are here. We have crossed the line." The lead drone swooped low, its Gatling gun spinning up. The red targeting laser painted a dot on Paul's chest. "Target acquired. Terminating hater." Paul didn't flinch. He looked the machine in its optic sensor. Suddenly, the wind changed. It wasn't a breeze. It was a gale. A massive wall of sand, a haboob, rose up from the desert floor out of nowhere. It slammed into the drones with the force of a hurricane. The grit and static electricity blinded the sensors. The drones spun out of control, crashing into the rocks or retreating back to the city wall. Paul and Sarah stood in the middle of the storm, but the sand didn't sting them. It swirled around them, a protective cocoon. "The pillar of cloud," Sarah whispered, falling to her knees. "He hit us." Paul pulled her up. "We keep moving while the storm holds." They turned their backs on the gleaming, wicked city of the beast. They walked into the blinding white desert, bleeding, thirsty, and hunted. But as they walked, Paul felt a strange sensation in his stomach. He wasn't hungry. He felt full. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out a piece of bread. It was warm, fresh. He looked at Sarah. She was holding a flask of water that should have been empty. It was full to the brim. Paul looked back at the wall of sand that hid them from the world. "The tribulation has begun," Paul said, "but so has the provision." They walked on, disappearing into the wilderness of God. The canyon was a jagged scar in the earth, invisible to the satellite grid thanks to the heavy mineral deposits in the rock walls that scattered radar waves. It should have been a grave. It was a desert, utterly devoid of natural water sources or arable land. Yet, as Paul stepped out of the tent he had stitched together from scavenged parachutes, he smelled something impossible. He smelled bread. "It's on the dew again," Sarah called out. She was kneeling near a cluster of sagebrush, gathering small, white, wafer-like substances into a woven basket. Paul walked over, his boots crunching on the red dirt. He looked at the camp. It wasn't just him and Sarah anymore. Over the last year, thousands had trickled in, refugees who had cut their trackers and fled the smart cities just before the oath was enforced. They were men, women, and children of every race, united by a single, desperate refusal to bow. They should have starved 6 months ago. Paul picked up one of the wafers. It was warm to the touch. It tasted like honey and coriander. The nutritional analysis Marcus ran on the old scanner. "It doesn't make sense," Paul said, taking a bite. "It contains every vitamin, every protein we need. It's perfectly engineered sustenance." "It's not engineered, Paul," Sarah smiled, her face tanned and healthy. "It's created. Daily bread." She pointed to the rock face at the back of the canyon. "And the water?" Paul nodded. He walked to the fissure in the stone. A year ago, it had been dry as a bone. Now, a steady, crystal-clear spring gushed from the rock, filling the clay cisterns they had built. It flowed day and night, defying the hydrogeological maps of the region. "We are in Goshen," Paul whispered, referencing the ancient Hebrew sanctuary in Egypt. "While the world burns, we eat." 300 miles south in the gleaming metropolis of Sector 7, there was no bread. There were only credits, and there were sores. Regent Kale, the governor of Region 3, stood before the mirror in his penthouse suite. The room was a marvel of luxury: automated climate control, holographic art, and a view of the rebuilt skyline. But Kale wasn't looking at the view. He was looking at his right hand. It started as an itch right under the skin where the digital tattoo of the oath had been applied. Then it became a blister. Now it was an open, weeping ulcer. The flesh around the mark was necrotic, turning a violent shade of purple. It smelled of rot. "Medical!" Kale shouted at the room's AI. "Administer pain suppression! Dosage maximum!" "I am sorry, Regent," the soothing voice of the AI replied. "Your biological readings indicate a systemic rejection of the dermal interface. Previous dosages have proven ineffective. This anomaly is affecting 88% of the population. The medical algorithms are unable to identify the pathogen. Kale screamed, smashing a crystal vase against the wall. The pain was excruciating, a noisome and grievous burning that felt like acid in his veins. He stumbled to the window. Below him, the streets of Sector 7 were chaotic. Ambulances hovered in gridlock. People were collapsing on the sidewalks, clawing at their foreheads and hands. The beautiful transhumanist utopia, promised by the Pope and the charismatic leader, had turned into a leper colony. His comms link buzzed. It was the false prophet, broadcasting from Rome. "Regent Kale," the leader's voice was tight, devoid of its usual charm. "The report indicates the infection is spreading." "It's the nanotech in the mark," Kale accused, clutching his throbbing hand. "It's defective. You poisoned us." "The technology is perfect," the prophet snapped. "The flaw is spiritual. It is a psychic attack. The haters in the wilderness, their negative vibrations are disrupting the harmonic resonance of the oath. They are cursing us, Kale." "Then wipe them out," Kale roared. "Send the drones! Send the legions!" "We have sent them," the prophet said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But the drones, they do not return." Back in the canyon, the sun was high and fierce. Paul was teaching a group of children how to filter sand when the sentry whistle blew. "Patrol!" a lookout shouted from the ridge. "Ground units! Sector 3 markings!" The camp didn't panic. Over the last year, they had learned that fear was a wasted emotion. Paul grabbed his staff. He no longer carried a rifle. He and Sarah ran to the canyon entrance. A squad of 10 Unity Peacekeepers had breached the perimeter. They were driving hover skiffs, weapons mounted and charged. But they weren't attacking. They were crashing. One of the skiffs veered wildly into a canyon wall, crumpling on impact. The pilot fell out, writhing in the dust. The other soldiers dismounted, stumbling. They were fully armored, their faces hidden behind visors, but their movements were erratic, jerky. "Halt!" the squad leader screamed, aiming his pulse rifle at Paul. "By order of the 10 regions, surrender! Surrender!" His voice cracked. He dropped to one knee, dropping the weapon to clutch at his chest plate. Paul walked forward, hands open. "We have no weapons to surrender. We only have the word." "You did this," the soldier wheezed. He ripped his helmet off. Sarah gasped. The soldier's face was a ruin. A massive, festering sore covered his forehead, right where the allegiance implant sat. Pus and blood ran down into his eyes. He looked like a man decomposing while still alive. "Help me," the soldier moaned, the aggression draining out of him, replaced by sheer agony. "It burns. It never stops burning." Sarah stepped forward, her nurse's instinct kicking in. She reached for her water flask. "I can clean the wound." "Don't touch him, Sarah," Paul warned gently. "It's the mark. It's the first bowl." Sarah hesitated. She poured water onto a cloth and tossed it to the soldier. "Wipe your face. Drink." The soldier grabbed the cloth. He scrubbed at the sore, screaming as the water touched it. "It boils!" he shrieked, throwing the cloth away. "Your water is fire! Witchcraft! You poisoned the water!" "The water is pure," Paul said sadly. "It is your covenant that is poison." The other soldiers were groaning, rolling in the dirt. The technology that was supposed to make them gods, the interface with the AI, was now torturing them. Every time the system tried to update or sync with them, the sores flared. "Turn back," Paul commanded, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "Go back to your cities. There is no relief for you here. The separation is final." The squad leader looked at Paul, healthy, strong, untouched by the plague. Then he looked at his own rotting hand. Hate flared in his eyes. "We will come back," the soldier spat, blood drooling from his lip. "When the leader finishes the calibration, we will bring the fire. We will burn this canyon to glass." "You can try," Paul said, "but you are fighting the Almighty." The soldiers dragged themselves back to the remaining skiffs. It took them 10 minutes just to mount up, their bodies racked with pain. They retreated in a cloud of dust, a broken, defeated mess. That night, the camp gathered around the fire. The mood was solemn. They had seen the face of the judgment, and it was terrifying. "Why them and not us?" a young man asked Paul. "I was almost one of them. I almost took the oath." "Grace," Paul said, staring into the flames. "Not merit, grace." Sarah sat beside him, looking up at the stars. The constellations seemed brighter out here, far away from the light pollution of the smart cities. "They blamed us," Sarah whispered. "Did you hear him? He said we poisoned the water." "They will blame us for everything," Paul said. "When the sea turns to blood, when the sun scorches them, they won't repent. They will just hate us more. That is the tragedy of the tribulation. Suffering doesn't save you if your heart is hard." He took a piece of the manna bread and broke it. "But we are safe," Paul said. "Look around. Not one sore, not one fever. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him." He looked at the thousands of faces glowing in the firelight, the remnant. "Eat," Paul said. "Rest. Tomorrow brings its own trouble, but tonight we are held." High above the canyon, invisible to the human eye, the atmospheric shield of the camp shimmered, a barrier not of technology, but of spirit, deflecting the signals of the beast and the gaze of the enemy. The stench hit Sector 7 long before the alarm sounded. It wasn't the metallic tang of industrial smog or the antiseptic smell of the habitation blocks. It was the heavy copper and rot scent of a slaughterhouse. Jaron, Paul's former supervisor at the ministry, stood on the observation deck of the Atlantic desalination hub. His cybernetic eyes zoomed in on the intake pipes that fed the city's water grid. Usually, the Atlantic Ocean was a regulated gray-blue, churned by the tidal generators. Today, it was thick. It was viscous. It was dark red. "Status report." "Rah!" Jaron barked at the plant AI. His voice was raspy. The sores from the first plague still covered his neck, weeping under his collar. "Filtration failure," the AI replied, its voice devoid of panic but heavy with glitching static. "Intake valves are clogged with biological material. Molecular analysis confirms hemoglobin, plasma, and platelets. It is human blood. Dead blood." Jaron gripped the railing. "The ocean? How much of it?" "All of it," the AI said. "Satellite telemetry confirms global saturation. The Pacific, the Indian, the Atlantic. Every living soul in the sea is dead." Jaron watched as a wave crashed against the seawall. It didn't spray, it splattered. It left a thick, coagulated residue on the white concrete. "Switch to the freshwater reserves," Jaron ordered, panic rising in his throat. "Pull from the Hudson aquifers." "I cannot," the AI said. "The aquifers are compromised. The rivers are compromised. The taps in the habitation blocks are dispensing grade A arterial fluid." Jaron pulled a flask from his pocket, his emergency ration. He unscrewed the cap. It was full of red sludge. He gagged, throwing the flask over the railing. He looked at the horizon. It looked like the world had bled out. 300 miles inland, in the hidden canyon of refuge, the sound of rushing water was the sweetest music on earth. Paul stood by the fissure in the rock. He held a clay cup under the flow. It was crystal clear, cold and sparkling with life. "It defies physics," Leo said. The boy was now 14, tall and strong, his mind sharp from Paul's teachings. The aquifers connect. If the groundwater is blood down there, it should be blood up here. Physics bows to the creator, Leo, Paul said, taking a long drink. We are drinking from the rock in the wilderness. It is a separate supply. Sarah walked up, carrying a basket of the manna wafers. She looked troubled, holding a portable shortwave receiver. I picked up a broadcast from Region 1, she said. They're dying of thirst, Paul. The electrolyte synthesizers can't keep up. They're trying to filter the blood, but the nanobots in the water keep breaking down. Revelation 16:6, Paul quoted softly. For they have shed the blood of saints and prophets, and thou hast given them blood to drink, for they are worthy. It feels cruel, Leo said, looking at the clear water in his hand. It is justice, Paul corrected. For 200 years they mocked the blood of the Lamb. Now they must drink the blood of the world they worshipped. It is the death of their ideology made liquid. Sarah adjusted the dial on the radio. The voice of the false prophet cut through the static, frantic and hateful. Do not listen to the lies of nature. This is not God. This is bioterrorism. The resistance in the mountains has released a necrovirus into the water table. They are trying to dehydrate the peace. They are murderers. He's shifting the narrative, Sarah said. He can't fix the water, so he has to kill the scapegoat. He knows where we are, Paul said, looking at the sky. The water separates us. It's a beacon. Life here, death there. He's coming. The attack came at twilight. It wasn't a troop transport this time. The beast system had learned that ground troops were unreliable, too sick with sores, too thirsty to fight. This was a swarm. Thousands of autonomous Hornet drones crested the canyon rim. They looked like a black cloud against the bruising purple sky. Each one carried a micro-payload of napalm designed to burn the canyon clean. Paul stood in the center of the camp. To the caves, he shouted. Get the children inside. There's too many, Leo yelled, grabbing a staff. We can't hide everyone. Paul didn't run. He walked to the center of the clearing, right beside the gushing spring. He looked up at the buzzing cloud of death descending upon them. Lord, Paul shouted, you shut the mouths of lions. You quenched the violence of fire. Defend your remnant. The swarm leader, a larger command drone, locked onto Paul. A red laser painted his forehead. Target locked. Incineration sequence initiated. Paul closed his eyes. Crack, boom. It wasn't a missile. It was the sky tearing open. A bolt of lightning, blue-white and thicker than a redwood tree, slammed into the canyon rim, but it didn't hit the ground. It branched out, arcing horizontally across the sky like a spiderweb of pure electricity. It hit the drone swarm. The sound was deafening, the screech of frying electronics and exploding fuel cells. The sky rained fire, but it was the wreckage of the enemy, not their weapons. The lightning didn't stop. It danced around the camp, a cage of high voltage. It struck every single drone with surgical precision. Inside the storm, the air smelled of ozone and rain. Outside, it was chaos. Within 30 seconds, the sky was clear. The ground was littered with smoking metal debris. Not a single tent was singed. Not a single hair on a believer's head was scorched. Paul opened his eyes. He looked at Leo, who was staring open-mouthed at the smoking remains of a drone at his feet. The Prince of the Power of the Air, Paul whispered, just got evicted. Back in Sector 7, the charismatic leader watched the feed go dead in his command center. The swarm is lost, a technician reported, his voice cracking with thirst. Atmospheric anomaly, a localized superstorm. The leader slammed his fist onto the console. His skin was pale, his lips cracked and bloody. He grabbed a bottle of filtered hydration fluid, a pinkish, foul-smelling liquid that was the best they could produce. "They have weather control," the leader hissed. "They have tech we don't know about." "It's not tech, Eminence," the technician whispered, looking at the blank screen. "The lightning, it targeted the guidance chips. It was intelligent." The leader spun around, his eyes flashing with a demonic rage. "Get out! Get out!" As the room cleared, the false prophet walked to the window. He looked at the red ocean churning against the seawall. He knew. Deep down, he knew. This wasn't a virus. This wasn't a rebellion. It was the second bowl. It was the third bowl. "You think you can starve me out?" he whispered to the silent iron sky. "I will burn them all. If I have to scorch the sun itself, I will burn them." He turned back to the camera. He composed his face into a mask of tragic resolve. "Citizens," he prepared his speech, "the haters have attacked our water, but we will persevere. We will evolve past the need for water. We will ascend." He took a sip of the bloody water and forced himself to swallow. The thermometer on the wall of the communications tent read 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Outside the tent, the temperature was 135 degrees Fahrenheit. Paul stepped out, looking up. He didn't squint. Above the canyon of refuge, a massive billowing canopy of white mist hung suspended in the air. It wasn't a natural cloud. It didn't drift with the wind, and it didn't dissipate in the dry desert air. It was a ceiling, a pillar of cloud that stretched for miles, casting a cool, deep shadow over the camp of the believers. "The heat dome is expanding," Leo said, walking up with a datapad he had scavenged and repurposed. "I'm picking up telemetry from the low-orbit weather satellites. The ozone layer over the 10 regions has vanished." "Vanished?" Sarah asked, looking up from a garden patch where tomatoes grew impossibly fast in the cool shade. "Incinerated," Leo corrected. "The atmospheric shields the system built? They overloaded. The fusion reactors that powered them couldn't handle the solar flare. Now, they're acting like magnifying glasses." Paul walked to the edge of the camp, where the shadow of the cloud ended and the true sunlight began. He threw a dry stick into the sunlight. It didn't just land, it smoked. Within 10 seconds, it curled and blackened. "Power was given unto him to scorch men with fire," Paul whispered. "The sun is no longer a star. It's a weapon." In Sector 7, the concept of daytime had been abolished. The city was under mandatory solar lockdown. The gleaming glass towers that were once the pride of the reconstruction were now ovens. The smart glass had turned opaque black to reflect the radiation, turning the city into a dark, subterranean tomb during the day. But the heat got in. It always got in. Regent Kale sat in his bunker, 3 levels underground. The air conditioning was roaring like a jet engine, struggling to keep the room at 90 degrees. He was naked from the waist up, his body a map of agony. The sores from the first plague had never healed. They had ulcerated. Now the heat exacerbated them, turning his skin into a weeping, blistered mess. "Water," he croaked. A service drone rolled over, dispensing a cup of the thick, red fluid that passed for water since the second plague. Kale knocked it away. "Ice! I want ice!" "Thermal regulation failure," the room's AI intoned. "Grid capacity at 12%. Cooling diverted to server farms. Biological comfort is secondary." "Secondary?" Kale screamed. "I am a king of the 10 regions!" He looked at the screen on the wall. It showed the street level. A man, a citizen with a Tier 4 social credit score, was trying to run from one building shadow to another. He stumbled. He fell onto the asphalt. The asphalt was liquid. The man screamed, but the sound was cut short as his clothes ignited. It wasn't spontaneous combustion, it was radiant ignition. The sun simply cooked him where he lay. Kale didn't look away. He didn't feel pity. He felt a cold, seething hatred that was hotter than the sun. "It's them," Kale whispered, scratching at the mark on his forehead until it bled. "The haters. They stole the shield. They hacked the weather." He looked at the ceiling, shaking a fist at the god he claimed didn't exist. "You think this hurts?" he hissed at the ceiling. "I will never bow. I will burn before I bow. Your sun is nothing compared to my will." The perimeter of the cloud was the busiest place in the camp. Every night, under the cover of darkness when the heat subsided to a survivable 100 degrees, refugees would arrive. They came crawling out of the wasteland, their skin red and peeling, their lips cracked, their eyes blinded by the glare. Paul and Sarah were on triage duty. "We have a family coming in from the North Ridge," a sentry shouted. "They're in bad shape." Paul ran out to meet them. A man and a woman were dragging a makeshift sled carrying a teenage girl. They crossed the line of shadow. The man collapsed, gasping. "The fire! The sky is fire!" Sarah was there instantly with a flask of the miraculous spring water. She poured it gently over the man's blistered back. "It's okay," she soothed. "You're under the cloud. The sun can't touch you here." The man drank greedily. He looked at his hand. The oath mark was burned, charred by the sun, but the skin around it was healing as the water touched it. "Why?" the man wept. "Why did we wait? We saw the sores, we saw the blood, but we wouldn't leave the city. We thought the system would fix it." "Fear," Paul said, lifting the girl from the sled. She was unconscious but breathing. "The system promised you safety. It's a hard promise to break." "They're cursing him," the woman whispered, looking back toward the shimmering heat haze of the horizon. "In the shelters, they scream at God. They say he's a tyrant. They say the false prophet is going to build a new sun. They believe the lie even while they burn." Paul looked at the refugees. This was the separation. The heat was burning away the fence-sitters. Those who stayed in the city now were doing so out of pure, distilled rebellion. They would rather burn with the beast than cool off with the lamb. That evening, Paul climbed to the highest point of the canyon. The sun had set, leaving behind a sky that glowed a radioactive orange. Leo sat beside him. "The prophecies say they blasphemed the name of God," Leo said quietly. "I never understood that. If I was burning, I'd beg for it to stop. I'd apologize." "Repentance requires humility, Leo," Paul said. "The mark, the oath, it locks them into pride. To repent now, they would have to admit that their entire reality, the AI, the Pope, the credits, the science, was wrong. They would have to admit they were deceived. And for the natural man, being wrong is more painful than being burned." Paul pointed to the distant glow of Sector 7. "They are building their own hell," Paul said. "God is just giving them what they asked for. They wanted a world without his protection. This is it. Nature without grace." "What comes next?" Leo asked. Paul looked at the darkening sky. The orange fade was turning into a deep, unnatural black. Not the black of night, but the black of a void. "The fifth bowl," Paul said heavily. "They hate the light of truth? Then they will get darkness. A darkness so thick they will gnaw their tongues for pain." He put a hand on Leo's shoulder. "But in Goshen," Paul smiled, "there will be light in our dwellings." Below them, the campfires of the believers flickered, thousands of tiny lights, safe under the supernatural canopy, waiting for the final act of the drama to begin. The darkness didn't fall. It rose. It seeped out of the ground, swallowed the horizon, and choked the sky. It wasn't just the absence of photons. It was a substance, thick, cloying, and heavy. It was the physical manifestation of a world without God. In the control center of Sector 7, the emergency lights flickered and died. "Reboot!" Regent Kale screamed into the blackness. "Switch to the quantum backup!" System unresponsive. The AI's voice was no longer soothing. It was distorted, slowed down, like a dying battery record. Optical sensors. Blind. Photonic generation. Impossible. The light of the world protocol has failed. Kale fumbled in the dark. He found a high-powered tactical flashlight, the kind used by the Peacekeepers. He clicked it on. The beam extended 6 inches and stopped. The darkness ate the light. It swallowed the beam whole. Kale hyperventilated. He was alone in the dark with the pain. The heat of the last year had vanished, replaced by a damp, soul-crushing cold. But the sores, the ulcers from the first plague, were burning hotter than ever. He tried to scream, but his tongue felt too big for his mouth. It was swollen, dry, and agonizing. He bit down on it, trying to use the sharp pain of the bite to distract himself from the dull, throbbing ache of the sores. Gnaw their tongues for pain. He remembered the verse. He had deleted it from the archives himself 10 years ago. "No," Kale whimpered, spitting blood into the dark. "This is a simulation, a hack. The haters have hacked my eyes." He stumbled forward, crashing into his desk. He clawed at his face, tearing at the mark on his forehead. The bioluminescent tattoo, which had glowed green for 5 years, was dead. The seat of the beast was blind. 300 miles away in the Canyon of Refuge, it was noon. Or at least it looked like noon. Paul sat outside his tent, mending a sandal. The light around him was soft, golden, and warm. It didn't come from the sun. The sun was currently a black void in the sky. It didn't come from a lamp. It came from the air itself. "It's Exodus 10, Sarah said, walking up with a basket of fresh vegetables from the garden. "But all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings." She looked up at the sky. Beyond the perimeter of their camp, the world was a wall of ink. They were living inside a bubble of glory. "Leo is down by the spring," Sarah said softly. "He says he can hear them." "Hear who?" "The city. The wind carries the sound." Paul stood up and walked to the edge of the camp, where the supernatural light met the supernatural night. He listened. At first, it sounded like the wind in the wires, but then he recognized it. It was a wail, a collective, citywide moan of sheer terror. Millions of people, trapped in the pitch black, unable to see their hands in front of their faces, unable to find food, unable to find their families. The AI was dead. The locks on the doors wouldn't open. They were entombed in their smart homes. "They are in outer darkness," Paul whispered, "before the judgment even begins." Leo walked up to the line, holding a lantern. He pushed the lantern into the darkness. The flame sputtered and turned blue, shedding no light beyond the glass. "Why don't they repent?" Leo asked, pulling the lantern back into the safety of the camp. "If I was in that, I would call out to Jesus." "They can't," Paul said sadly. "The darkness isn't just outside, Leo. It's inside. They took the oath to Lucifer. They chose the light bearer. Now that his light is out, they have nothing but their pride." Inside the Vatican, the pontiff sat on his throne. The candles had all been extinguished by the heavy atmosphere. The great stained glass windows were black squares. He was weeping, but not for his sins. He was weeping for his power. "Aurelius," he shouted into the void, "where is the tech? You promised the eternal grid. You promised we would transcend nature." A voice answered from the darkness of the nave. It was the false prophet, Aurelius. His voice was no longer charismatic. It was serpentine and cold. "The technology relies on physics, Holy Father. This is not physics." "Fix it!" the Pope shrieked, scratching at the sores on his neck until his collar was wet with blood. "The people are losing faith! They are blaspheming us!" "They are blaspheming him," Aurelius corrected, stepping closer, his footsteps echoing on the marble. "Listen to them." Outside St. Peter's, the mob was howling. They weren't praying for mercy. They were cursing the sky. They were cursing the God of the Bible. They blamed him for the dark. They blamed him for the pain. "They hate him more than ever," Aurelius whispered, a smile audible in his voice. "Good. That means they are still ours." "What do we do?" the Pope whimpered. "We wait," Aurelius said. "This is the 5th bowl. There are only 2 left. When the light returns, and it will return, I will tell them that the darkness was the final attack of the resistance. I will tell them that the Christians stole the sun." "And then?" "And then," Aurelius hissed, "we will gather them. We will give them a target for their pain. We will march on the wilderness, and we will kill every last one of them." Back in the camp, the mood was not one of fear, but of deep, reverent awe. Without the distraction of the sun or the stars, the presence of God in the camp was heavy. People spoke in whispers. Worship services happened spontaneously, lasting for hours. Paul stood in the center of the gathering. They didn't need a fire. The faces of the believers shone with the reflected light of the glory that covered them. "The world is ending," Paul said, his voice ringing clear in the quiet air. "The kingdom of the beast has fallen into shadow. But look at you." He gestured to the crowd, men and women who had lost their jobs, their homes, their status, and their families for the sake of the name. "You are the light of the world," Paul quoted. "A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Even now, while they gnaw their tongues in the dark, we are feasting." He broke a loaf of the manna bread. "This is the 5th year," Paul said. "Hold on. The darkness is the herald of the dawn. The king is coming." They ate in the light, while the world slept in the nightmare of its own making. The darkness that had suffocated the 10 regions for a year did not end with the sunrise. It ended with a flash. In the center of Sector 7, floating above the ruins of the Grand Plaza, a singularity of light appeared. It wasn't the harsh, scorching radiation of the sun that had burned them in 77. This light was soft, prismatic, and deeply seductive. It bathed the blackened skyscrapers in a gold hue, making the destruction look like art. Regent Kale stood on his balcony. He was a husk of a man, skeletal after a year of famine and darkness. His sores were open wounds. His tongue was chewed raw. But as the light touched him, the pain stopped. It didn't heal him. The rot remained, but the sensation of agony vanished, replaced by a flood of dopamine and serotonin so intense his knees buckled. "He is here," Kale wept, tears of ecstasy streaming down his scarred face. "The Ascended One." The screens that had been dead for 12 months flickered to life. The AI grid rebooted, not with code, but with a strange, organic hum. On every screen, from the wrist comms of the starving citizens to the wall-sized monitors in the plaza, the face appeared. He looked like the paintings in the old museums, but perfected. Eyes of compassionate fire, robes of woven starlight. He did not speak with words. He spoke with thoughts, bypassing the ears and vibrating directly in the mind. "My children," the voice echoed in Kale's skull. "The purification is complete. You have suffered the dark night of the soul. Now I return to bring the dawn." In the Vatican, the doors of the basilica burst open. The pontiff, the man the world called the supreme moral authority, the Antichrist, stumbled out into the square. He fell to his knees before the floating apparition. Beside him stood Aurelius, the charismatic leader and false prophet. Aurelius raised his hands, calling down fire from the sky, not to burn, but to dazzle. Pyrotechnic displays of energy danced around the Vatican. "Behold!" Aurelius shouted, his voice amplified to the ends of the earth. "The Christ has returned, not to judge, but to integrate. He has come to merge heaven and earth." The being descended. He touched the ground. Where his feet stepped, flowers bloomed instantly from the concrete, genetically accelerated, impossible flora. He approached a row of the sick, people rotting from the sores of the first plague. He waved his hand. They stood up. They danced. They laughed. The sores were still there, visible and oozing, but the people no longer cared. They were trapped in a euphoric delusion, a strong delusion that made them believe the lie. "I have healed your pain," the being projected, "but I cannot heal the earth, not yet." The euphoria in the crowd dampened slightly. A collective anxiety rippled through the 10 regions. "There is a blockage," the being said, his face twisting into a mask of tragic sorrow. "A virus in the collective consciousness, the fundamentalists, the haters in the wilderness." The screens shifted. They showed satellite imagery of the Canyon of Refuge. It showed the believers, healthy, clean, fed, drinking clear water. "Look at them," the being whispered. "They hoard the resources. They stole the rain. They cursed the sun to burn you. They summoned the darkness. As long as they breathe, the earth cannot ascend to the 5th dimension." A roar went up from the crowd. It wasn't human. It was the sound of millions of demons speaking through millions of broken throats. "Gather," the being commanded. "Gather at Megiddo. We will march on their camp. We will excise the cancer. And then, paradise." In the Canyon of Refuge, the mood was tense but calm. Paul stood on the ridge with Leo, looking through a high-powered telescope. They could see the convoys moving in the distance. The kings of the East, the armies of the Asian regions, were crossing the dried-up bed of the Euphrates, joining forces with the European and American battalions. "They say he's Jesus," Leo whispered, watching the news feed on his scavenged datapad. "Paul, he looks like Jesus. He acts like Jesus. He's doing miracles." "He is a liar," Paul said firmly, "and the father of it." He turned to the group of refugees gathered behind him. Some of them looked terrified. A few were wavering, looking at the glowing figure on the screen with longing. "Listen to me," Paul shouted. "Matthew 24:26. Wherefore, if they shall say unto you, Behold, he is in the desert, go not forth. Behold, he is in the secret chambers, believe it not." "But he stopped the pain," a woman cried out. "My sister is in the city. She messaged me. She says she doesn't hurt anymore." "He didn't heal her." Sarah stepped forward, her voice fierce. "He anesthetized her. He's leading them to the slaughterhouse with a smile." Paul pointed to the east. "When the true king comes," Paul said, "he won't need a satellite feed. He won't need the Pope to endorse him. For as the lightning cometh out of the east, and shineth even unto the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be." "Every eye shall see him," Leo quoted, "not just the people with neurolinks." "Exactly," Paul said. "Do not be deceived. This is the final test, the lying wonder." 6 months passed. The 6th year bled into the 7th. The armies gathered. It was the largest military force in human history. The iron of the machines mixed with the clay of the possessed humanity. Billions of credits, trillions of watts of energy, all focused on one goal: killing the remnant. They surrounded the wilderness. Paul sat in the entrance of the cave. The manna had been double portioned that morning. The spring was overflowing. "It's time," Paul said to Sarah. "Are you afraid?" she asked. She held his hand. Her grip was strong. They had aged in these 7 years, but they were strong. They were warriors. "I'm ready to go home," Paul said. "Look," Leo pointed. Below them, in the Valley of Armageddon, the false Messiah was levitating. He glowed with a pulsating, hypnotic rhythm. He raised a sword of pure energy. "Destroy them!" The command ripped through the psychic plane. "Reclaim your future!" The tanks swiveled their turrets. The sonic cannons charged. The ground shook as the infantry began the ascent up the mountain paths. "They're coming!" a sentry yelled. Paul stood up. He walked to the edge of the cliff. He didn't raise a weapon. He raised his head. "Look up!" Paul shouted to the camp. "Don't look at the beast! Look up! Your redemption is here!" The sky above the canyon began to tear. It wasn't the atmospheric shield failing this time. It was the fabric of reality unzipping. A white horse broke the barrier of the dimension. And then, the true silence fell. The false Messiah looked up, and for the first time, his face showed fear.
The 7th year ended not with a whimper, but with the roar of 10 million engines. Paul stood on the precipice of the Canyon of Refuge. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and sulfur. Below him, stretching as far as the eye could see into the Valley of Megiddo, was the Iron Army. The Beast system had emptied the 10 regions. Every drone, every tank, every sonic cannon, and every soldier capable of standing had been mobilized. They were a sea of black steel and bioluminescent armor, pulsing with the collective heartbeat of the artificial intelligence that controlled them. "It's the whole world," Leo whispered, standing beside Paul. The boy was 15 now, a warrior of the faith who had grown up under the pillar of cloud. "They really think they can fight God?" "They don't think they are fighting God," Paul said, adjusting his robe, the simple linen that had never worn out in 7 years. "They think they are fighting a virus. They think if they kill us, the sun will come back. They think they can reboot the universe." Sarah walked up to the line, holding the hand of an elderly woman who had arrived just days before. "The false Messiah is moving," Sarah said, pointing to the center of the valley. A floating platform, generating its own golden light, rose above the army. On it stood the being, the false Christ, flanked by the Pope and the 10 regional kings. The being's voice boomed across the psychic plane, vibrating in the teeth of every believer. "The eclipse of humanity ends today," the false Messiah declared. "We have cornered the darkness, fire at will, erase them from the timeline." The 7th bowl. Paul didn't flinch. He grabbed Sarah's hand. He grabbed Leo's hand. "It is done," Paul whispered. It wasn't Paul who spoke. It was a voice from the temple of heaven. Revelation 16:17. And the 7th angel poured out his vial into the air, and there came a great voice out of the temple of heaven from the throne saying, "It is done." The ground didn't just shake, it liquefied. The great earthquake hit. This wasn't tectonic shifting. This was the earth recoiling from the presence of its creator. In the valley below, the ground split open. Massive fissures swallowed entire battalions of tanks. The floating platform of the false Messiah wavered, its anti-gravity drives failing against the sheer magnitude of the shockwave. "The cities!" Sarah screamed, pointing to the horizon. In the distance, the skyline of Sector 7, the pride of the beast, the Tower of Babel rebuilt, collapsed. The skyscrapers fell like dominoes. The smart zones crumbled into dust. The islands fled away. The mountains were not found. Then the hail came. Stones the weight of a talent, 75 pounds, fell from the sky, crushing the advanced weaponry of the beast like tin cans. The sign. The darkness of the 6th year returned for a split second, absolute and terrifying. And then, the east split open. It wasn't a sunrise. It was a rip in the fabric of space-time. A light appeared that made the false light of the Antichrist look like a dying ember. It was a light of such purity and intensity that the soldiers in the valley screamed and covered their faces. The sign of the Son of Man.
He came on the clouds of heaven. He was not a holographic projection. He was hyper-real. The King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. The false Messiah, the being who had masqueraded as Jesus for a year, looked up. The golden aura around him shattered. His face morphed, revealing the dragon beneath, terrified, trembling, and defeated. The armies of the beast tried to swivel their weapons toward the sky, but the spirit of his mouth, the word of God, hit them. It wasn't a laser, it was truth. The realization of their own sin, the undeniable reality of the God they had mocked, consumed them. Their strength evaporated. The resurrection. Paul felt a vibration in his feet. It wasn't the earthquake. It was a hum, a frequency of life. "Look!" Leo shouted, pointing to the canyon floor. The dirt was moving. Bursting from the soil, from the caves, from the dust of the earth, figures began to rise. They weren't zombies. They were glorious. "Marcus!" Sarah cried out. Walking up the slope was Marcus, the engineer who had been disappeared in 2072. He looked perfect. No scars, no age. He was glowing with an internal light. Behind him were thousands, millions of others. The martyrs of the tribulation, the saints of the ages. They were rising to meet the king. Paul looked at Sarah. "It's our turn. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye." It started in the chest, a surge of heat, but not the burning heat of the sun. It was the heat of a star being born. Paul looked at his hands. The skin, which had been weathered by the wilderness, began to change. The carbon-based biology, the flesh that could bleed, the bones that could break, it was being overwritten. He felt the heaviness of gravity vanish, the ache in his knees, the memory of hunger, the scar of the tracking chip he had cut out. It all dissolved. He wasn't just healed, he was transmuted. Mortal put on immortality, corruptible put on incorruption. He looked at Sarah. She was breathtaking. She was no longer a ragged refugee. She was a queen of the cosmos, radiant and powerful. "Paul!" She laughed, and the sound was like music. I can see him clearly." "We are like him," Paul whispered, his voice resonating with new power. "For we see him as he is." Their feet left the ground. It wasn't flight, it was attraction. The earth could no longer hold them. They belonged to the sky now. Leo zoomed past them, spinning in the air, shouting with joy. Together with the resurrected saints, the living remnant rose. They floated up out of the canyon of refuge, rising above the smoke of the burning world. Below them, the beast system lay in ruins. The false prophet and the Antichrist were being seized. Their deception ended. But Paul didn't look down. He looked up. The clouds parted. The king waited, arms open, surrounded by the armies of heaven. Paul reached out and took Sarah's hand as they ascended into the glory. The long war was over. The resistance had won. They were no longer refugees in Babylon. They were citizens of Zion. And so, they remained with the Lord forever.